Tara, you could go ahead.
I'm not. You're hearing?
Yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
I'm getting no song now. Um, hello, hello. Um, okay. All right. Good evening. I'm sorry for the interruption. My regular desktop has some technical issues. I have to use my cell phone. I hope everyone is hearing me this evening. We are very honored to have well-known and distinguished Amerindian leader, Honorable Lenox Shuman. He's also the leader of the Liberal and Justice Party in Guyana, but he didn't contest the last election. He joined with the PPP. As a matter of fact, he's a member of the PPP team now in Parliament. He's also by profession uh, pilot, and he also served as a deputy speaker of the Parliament in Guyana for some time. Um, I believe he's part of the Two Shaw Council as well. Maybe he can clarify that. But it's our honor to welcome him um, to this program tonight. Mr. Schumann, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a pleasure. And before I start, there was something in the news about the Amerindian hostel in Georgetown. And I know you made a comment on it, and likewise several other leaders. I noticed today the two shall come out with a statement. Would you like to make some further commentary commentary on that? Because people, especially in diaspora, would like to know what's really going on and if there's any substance in the allegation being made by people of the Win Party.
Well, Doc, first let me say thank you so much to your distinguished panelists and your viewership. I want to say it's an honor to be invited on this program to be able to speak on some of the substantive issues going on in Guyana. Um, I wanted to clarify, I'm not part of the National Two Shows Council. I was actually the vice chair during my tenure as chief of my community. To go to the point of the Armenian hostel, it is more than an issue of just the Armenian hostel. The gentleman who leads the party in itself has spent decades upon decades exploiting indigenous peoples. He's, when we go into the fields, we hear cases of abuse that have transpired under his hand and under his watch with his operation. And we know the vice president and the president and themselves have called him out on I'd say on the reasons as to why he is now entering politics. It has nothing to do with care for people. It is all a selfish motivation. So when he goes into these places, we've known for decades, and I think every political party has known. Paul Hardy, who at the time launched GAP, going back all the way to Peter Degar, when he courted the Armenian votes, everyone understands that the Armenian votes are the swing votes in the country. And the Mohammeds, they simply saw that as an opportunity to try to hold the government and the country ransom so that the government could lobby on their behalf to get the sanctions lifted. And the vice president was unequivocal in his response to that. He said, no, we will not put the country on a sword for any individual. And that is what led them to this. Now, recognizing their knowledge of indigenous peoples and looking at the gaps, there is a there's a gentleman there, Charles Sugrum. Charles Sugrum used to be part of our team. He was part of the AFC. And it had always been background knowledge of the critical role of indigenous peoples. So he got into parliament, and what he's trying to do is simply agitate as much as he can on these very issues. And he will pick some of the things that he was actually party to go and say, well, this is unjust, this is unjust, when he himself would have benefited and profited from some of those very same things. Going to the hostel has had some significant challenges. I cannot say that it is without challenges. Are there things that need to be fixed? No doubt. Like every single home, like every single structure, like every single hotel, every single car, there is always something that needs to be fixed. Now, are we going to make a mountain out of a molehill? I think those are some of the fundamental questions that people should ask. People have gone to the hostel. I'm not saying that it is 100%, but I've gone to the hostel. I've eaten there. I've visited. On a more personal note, my family continues to be, I'd say, contributors to the hostel in a very small way, which they didn't really want. We really don't want to speak about those things, but I wanted to say those things so that people understand that the issues in the hostel, they're not alien to me. I've had family members who have stayed there. I myself would have stayed there some years back. So you are going to find some small things. But now bringing those things and approaching it the way Azardine and his people approached it was beyond, I'd say, what is acceptable for a member of parliament.
Okay, but based on the news, it was reported by the honorable minister that a new hostel is being in the works. They are planning to build a new hostel now, and they're not going to repair that or renovate it. They are going to build a new structure completely, or what? You have any idea on that?
That is correct. That is correct. I attended a consultation, and in fact, it was more of a planning meeting at the Ministry of Armenian Affairs.
Mm.
It was led by the Honorable Minister herself and the entire ministry, the advisor, the MPs, I think the executive director of the ministry, the permanent secretary, and myself. We were all there with the architect. Went through that planning meeting. What is it that we're looking for in the new hostel? We recognize that the hostel, the current structure, cannot meet the needs and the growing population needs, the growing needs of the population, sorry, of
Mm.
the indigenous peoples. And it is that recognition that the government said, you know what, we are going to build a new facility. And the facility, because we are very limited in what we can do with the current one. When you look at it, cement walls, it is not something that you can simply pick up and move. You'd have to get heavy equipment in there to break and move things around. So the government said, well, this year we have outgrown this facility. It is dated.
Mm.
We can only do so much with this facility. So what we are going to do is build a brand spanking new facility that will cater to everything that indigenous peoples would want when they come to Georgetown, in terms of their medical well-being, in terms of their educational well-being, their emotional well-being, their psychological everything. So you're going to have not only rooms so that people could have have privacy. You're going to have spaces where if people wanted to put up their hammocks, they could do that. A wellness center, rec room, place to have a barbecue, place to hang out outside. A whole lot of thought is being put into this new structure, or has been put into this new structure that will come in 2026. The land has already been identified, and as the minister said, everything is pretty much there. It is just waiting for budgets to be tendered in Parliament before we can move ahead.
Thank you very much. Before I pass on to Professor Budu and Professor Narayan, I just want you to comment on another issue which has been hitting the headlines. It was reported by one of the writers that the poverty rate in Guyana, I think he quoted from the IDB, was 58%. And the World Bank figure in 2019 was 48.4%. Now, those figures were in the past with the vast development that is taking place in every community, including the Amerindian community. Poverty levels gone down dramatically. I don't know why they continue to use these old figures. I mean, up to 22, 23, the COVID was still there, which is rampant in 21. And they're using 21 figures, the labor, the manpower study that they did in 21. And that was not about poverty, that was employment status and incomes, etc. But they have extrapolated from that and concluded that the property at the poverty level remained persistent and there. Now, what I would like you to have your comments, you travel a lot, you know the Amerindian community more than anybody else. Um, how you see the poverty rate? I know the Amerindian community has the highest rates of poverty in the country, to the extent that poverty exists. But you travel across the country, and if you can give us an insight, how you feel we are moving to eliminate, or we can't eliminate, but reduce the poverty level.
Well, Doc, I think there is some skew in the data that the IDB would have used, and I think there are countries that tend to drive their own narrative in a whole variety of areas. I would take you back to a recent bit of news that was also making the rounds done by the Telegraph out of the UK that said that the road from Linden to Mabora is going to cause destruction in the rainforest. There is massive corruption and a whole host of things without ever looking at the process. And I'll get to the substantive question, but I want to lead with this. When you look at what some news media, and you've got some very objective ones out there, but the Telegraph in itself sort of painted some of these things in a very interesting way. The Telegraph went in there and said there will be massive deforestation, negative impact on all the communities, tremendous corruption in the UK and in Guyana. Well, look at the process that it took to get that loan facility to build that road. It had to go through the upper and lower chambers in the UK to be budgeted that they could expend this on a loan. And that loan had to go and be approved by the Parliament of Guyana that goes into this whole consolidated fund or the loan facility that they may have in order to just build that road. And when they build the road, Guyana does not just take that money and shove it in some corner somewhere. It is being dealt with in deliverables. What have you delivered for the money that you're asking for? And it is gauged and it is measured. That's one. The second thing is every single community, indigenous community in Guyana, wants greater market access and greater economic integration and greater integration, period. So the benefits of that road in itself, opening access to forest, absolutely. We have a tremendous lot. Guyana has the second best forest governance in the world, second only to Suriname. But the access to some of those high value lumber, when you look at what the gas to energy will do, we could speak, I could speak here all night about some of these things. But the access to those resources in themselves and the access that it provides to all of the communities up and down the Lethem to Georgetown route, simply by integrating these communities, it is creating a different economic dynamic in communities. And what that does is when you look at the poverty and poverty reduction of the government, their approach to it, it is a comprehensive thing. It is not one spot where you're going to plug and say, you know what, we're going to give you cash grants and this will offset the poverty numbers. No, the government is taking a multifaceted, comprehensive approach to the reduction of poverty. And when you go to indigenous communities, through the low carbon development strategy, communities are benefiting up to about 36 million Guyana dollars per year to drive the economics and economy in their community. They could undertake large scale agriculture. They could get into mining, the lumber industry. They could get into so many variety of things, including tourism. And when you go to these communities, in some community, you cannot even find labor. I will say my community, for example, one of the larger communities of about 1,700 people. Were you to go into that community and say, look, I would like to build a house, trying to find someone from the community that can build a house for you, you're not going to find them because they're all employed. When you go to their homes, when you go into these communities, you will see the fluidity of the economy and the fluidity of the cash flow in those economies. So I wouldn't say that we don't have poverty. Of course, we do have poverty. There are people who still cannot access the economy simply because they have not put themselves in there. And the government has made so many initiatives available to every single Guyanese for the reduction of poverty. Free education from nursery all the way to PhD. You've got the Guyana Online Academy of Learning. You've got cash grants. You've got employment in almost every sector. There's a shortage of people. There's a shortage of people in the country who can be employed in a variety of industries. And I dare say that some of the people who are impoverished may have some unique challenges because they historically may not have been able to tap into some of those things. And that in itself, I mean, I came on earlier and was part of your discussion on technology. Some of these communities you go to, people have not taken the time to learn about technology in a manner that benefits them. So if they get the phone, they're going to look at TikTok, Facebook, get on the social media sites, but they're not going to sit there and say, hold on, I could apply for Gold Scholarship. I don't need high school. I don't need university, right? It actually builds me towards that. But they don't know how to utilize the technology to drive themselves into that frame that now supports them to accessing the economy in that sense.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Narayan.
Yeah, I was just wondering what is being done to integrate the Amerindians into the larger society because they have always been excluded. Or
Gentlemen, I will ask you, could you hold out for 30 seconds, please? I seem to have lost a little bit of sound here. So I'm going to mute my song and turn off my camera just for, I'd say maybe 30 seconds,
Okay, go ahead.
please.
Okay. Asif, you can do the ad now. You can run the ad.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm back on. I've plugged
All
in a
right.
headset just so that I can
Pro-
get the better sound.
right. Okay. Professor Narayan?
yeah, I was just wondering
Yeah,
what is
over to you.
being done to integrate the Amerindians into the larger society, and do you think that integration would be beneficial to the Amerindians?
Absolutely. I think that that is something that we have struggled to be part of Guyana. I mean, as the first peoples, it seems like we have been left behind significantly. And part of that access to the economy is a critical component. And I would use this question to highlight a point. I think at any point in your conversations with Guyanese, were I to ask you to name five prominent and financially wealthy Indian folks, people of Indian descent, at the drop of a hat you could name them. And the same thing with Afro-Guyanese. And the Portuguese and Chinese are in a league of their own. But if I were to ask you to name me one, just one, wealthy indigenous person, I dare say that you would not be able to do that. Not you, not anyone in Guyana. And the reason for that is that we have never had the kind of access to the economy that we should. And the integration component becomes critical because if we cannot integrate into the economy and we cannot integrate into the greater society, then we become deficient not only in terms of our education, but in terms of how we contribute and build Guyana, how we become, I'd say, upstanding patrons of the very country within which we were born, in which we've always lived.
Yeah, well, this the second part of the question. The first part of the question was, what is being done?
My apologies. Could you repeat that one?
I said, what is being done to integrate
Right.
the.
So what is being done? The government has undertaken first with the infrastructural component. By building infrastructure,
050.
by building infrastructure that gives every Guyanese access and all those communities access to a variety of markets in themselves, that now drives, once again, the tourism industry, the forest industry, mining, I'd say innovative economy, if you're to put it that way, how they access. So all of those things are part and parcel. It is not something that we are going to have total integration, I'd say, within a year. You know, just to build out. And I say this because 4 years ago, Guyana had 2,640 kilometers of paved road. What the government has done, what they've undertaken so far, is that they've exponentially increased that. And as the country continues on this build out, as the government continues on this build out approach, all of those things are going to change. They have roads that will eventually go through the mountains from Latham. I don't know how your audience understands Guyana, but you go from a place like Latham, for example, all the way up to Cato, maybe all the way up to places like Chinapao, the top of Kaichor Falls. So there's a massive build out that is happening. It is, I would say, it's not happening at the rate at which infrastructure is being built in Georgetown, but the government has committed to building those things, and they have committed also, and they have started already to upgrade all of the runways in the communities that are accessed only by air. And they have committed also to building interconnecting roads between all of the communities so that you could stimulate that movement.
But integration does not is not limited to infrastructure, because you have to be respectful of the indigenous culture of the people. What is being done to integrate the people culturally, to make that kind of accommodation? And I am tired of listening to people talking about infrastructure, roads going here, there, and everywhere. That's, to me, that's an imposition. And the people feel it's an imposition. My brother studied the people of Oriala, and they were very, very skeptical of even a researcher going into the community, because they are not relics of the past. They are integral part of a society that has been alienated and neglected.
Right. So I think if you were to go and revisit some of these communities right now, you'd find a change in the mood and change in the tenor of people. Oriala being one of them, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Oriala was a community that you could only reach by river, going up the Currentine. A few years back, Oriala said, well, what happened is that when we have to deal with night travel, if we've got medevac and all of those things, we have no way to get people in and out of the community except to take a vessel by night, which could be dangerous. What they said, well, everything is changing at such a pace that we want a road. We want a road that goes from Oriala, that connects Oriala to Kokwani. So the government said, all right, well, if that is what you want, then that is what we are going to do. And you're quite right. Communities have been neglected for a very long time. And I'm happy to know that the People's Progressive Party, Civic, has seen some of the deficiencies of the past, and we are actually aggressively working to address those things. Integration is not only, and you're quite right, is not only infrastructure, but we have to look at the economic empowerment of indigenous peoples. I think that if you cannot be economically empowered, then the cultural component becomes maybe a bit mum. You know, if I can't eat, if I can't be part of this growing society and this growing country, I don't think that the country should expect that I'm going to go and use my cutlass and my hoe and my fork and go and plant cassava and reap once every 18 months, and then I will change my cycle and continue like that. It is culturally I'd say culturally part of our identity. But we also have to look at ways that we can innovate and we could still be part of the economy without losing some of those things. The cultural aspects of things, the government has put the National Two Shows Council in square view and square responsibilities of ensuring that that culture is not lost. And that is not only the National Two Shows Council, by the way. It is every village council as outlined in the Amerindian Act of 2006, and also the Indigenous Peoples Commission, a constitutional commission established only for Indigenous peoples. So you've got three separate bodies by statute that are responsible for that. And if the government were to come and say, all right, well, you know what, we want to do this, this, and this for Indigenous peoples, that in itself would be imposition. And we've seen some of those things historically. I mean, if you look at the Liquor Act right now, for example, the Liquor Act says it is illegal to sell alcohol to Amerindians. Now that in itself is an imposition. And what we're trying to do is to fix some of the archaic legislation. I am part of the Law Reform Commission. We're trying to fix some of these archaic things to ensure that as Indigenous peoples look at the new economy, that we could embrace modernity and still preserve our culture. And I think the government has been very supportive of that.
Can you explain the oversight to make sure that the process and the policies are adhered to?
Well, the National Two Shows Council has it squarely in their mandate under Part 4 of the Amerindian Act of 2006. That oversight in itself, we have not, I'd say, evolved the governance to the point where we deal with protections and all that stuff. Of course, all those things are outlined in the Constitution. Under Article 149G of the Constitution, it says Amerindian people or Indigenous peoples have the right to the protection, preservation, and promulgation of our cultural heritage and way of life. So the Constitution already empowers us as a people to be able to do that. In terms of, the misappropriation of things, we have not built, I'd say, subsidiary legislation to address some of those things as yet. And I rather suspect that that is something that the National Two Shows Council has on their radar, and so does the Indigenous Peoples Commission. And I will use a very simple thing. A cacique, for example. A cacique is meant to show the world and show everyone that comes in that this is our leader. It is not something that you could just go and buy and put it on and, it is not a costume. It is something that comes with a tremendous lot of significance culturally and in terms of leadership. So when people go out and they buy something and they just wear it and they walk around wherever, it is nice to know that you could identify that there are Indigenous peoples in the country. But it is misappropriated because it devalues I'd say the import of our symbol. And we have not reached that point yet. And it's something, like I said, that I strongly believe the National Two Shows Council is looking at.
All right, thank you very much. We go over now to Professor Budu. Professor Budu is an engineer, structural and civil engineer. He has vast experience traveling in the interior and all over the world. So, Professor Budu, over to you.
Shuman, good to have you on the program.
Thank you.
You have been an advocate for the Amerindians
Go
for a
ahead.
long period of time. What tangible policy shift have you seen
We are not hearing
resulting
you.
from your advocacy?
There has been, with me coming on stage, and I led the Liberty and Justice Party, and I came in midway through, I'd say, a political cycle.
Professor Budu?
Yes, we're hearing you, Dr. Tara.
Yes, go ahead.
Professor Budu?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
You want to Honorable Shuman to ask him any question or any
Yes, I did, and he's
clarification or
answering.
any
Yes,
points?
Yes, Dr. Tara. We are on to the questions already.
Yes.
So when you look at what, I said this much in I think it was 2016, 2017, when we had a consultant come from Ghana to do the EU FLECT program in Guyana as a consultant. The European Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade. Dr. Al Hassan Atta, and he was asking about indigenous peoples, maybe along the very same lines that you just did. And I told him the political party that takes care of the indigenous peoples will win the next election. And I said that not as a threat to the government. I said that to ensure that the government understood how important it is to ensure that the indigenous peoples are taken care of. And when you look back at the history of politics in Guyana and how the People's Progressive Party would have approached all of these things, the Article 149G of the Constitution, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic, the establishment of the Indigenous Peoples Commission, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic, the enactment of the Amerindian Act of 2006, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic, the forest carbon credit trade that indigenous communities benefit from, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic, the presidential grant that every community benefits from, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic, the continuous drive to ensure that indigenous lands are recognized, Amerindian land titling, brought in by the People's Progressive Party Civic. What I'm getting at with all of those things is that the People's Progressive Party Civic has always had in its sights the indigenous peoples and how they could work without trying to infringe on our rights, how they could work to ensure that our lives are better, that I'd say our lands are not infringed upon, our cultural identity is protected. And the shift that I would have seen from when I came into the field, into the fray, I should say, is that what they've done is that they have accelerated their programs in terms of addressing indigenous people's issues. That is what I've seen.
I see. Now, you look at the opposition, their primary push has been using cash grants to say, reduce poverty. Do you think that can really solve the poverty problem in the region and community?
Well, there is a very interesting thing. I mean, poverty exists across the globe. I'm currently in Canada, and there are a lot of people who are in poverty for such a wealthy country. You go to the US, a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and people are still impoverished. It doesn't matter where we go in this world, there will always be poverty. And when you go to more developed countries, they have something that they call welfare. You go and stand up in a line, you apply for a check, the government gives you money, and however it comes out, it doesn't. It doesn't really work very well in developed countries, and I've seen that. I've been to, I'd say I've flown to a significant amount of them. What the government of Guyana has done is that they have built this, they're building the system so that the cash grant cannot be looked at as poverty reduction. The cash grant is but a tool to bridge people into accessing the economy. I will go back to that. Access, economic access is such a critical thing regardless of where you live. And by utilizing that tool, they say, all right, well, if you can't do this, this, and this, well, here's a cash grant. And with that cash grant, you could take care of yourself for a little bit, build a bridge, and you could access all of the educational tools. Ultimately, if you give someone $1 million tomorrow, they could be walking in the streets anyway. What the
Yeah.
government has done is try to create that equalizing table, the equalizing platform, by providing free education for every single Guyanese. And that in itself, we are not going to see the results today and tomorrow. But you wait another 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, you are going to see this tremendous shift in Guyana. That I dare say that poverty, while it will never be something of the past, but you will see a significant reduction in it.
How would you rate the PPP progress in healthcare and education for the Amerindian community, being a community that is really in the hinterlands?
There is a tremendous lot that still needs to be done. And, I go back to some of these things with infrastructure. You cannot get emergency care in a community. Let's take a community like Chinapau or even Parmakato. You cannot get emergency care there. So they have developed telemedicine. So you could do virtual medicine there. But that will only go so far. Now, if I get injured at night and I have to send an aircraft to do a medevac, some of these communities are in the mountains. And you don't light up a mountain just to light the way for an airplane to go in. So by building a road from one of those communities to another emergency center, let's say like Madhya, for example, it now gives all of those communities access to emergency medicine. Once again, we are not there yet, but that is the direction that the government is going. In terms of the government's drive towards medical access and Medicare for Indigenous peoples, I would give them about a 7.5 out of 10 because we still have a way to go. In terms of education, 3 years ago, the amount of trained teachers in Guyana in Indigenous communities was under 50%, I think. If you were to go back and run those stats now, they're in the 80s, high 80%. And Minister Priya Manikchan had said, you know what, we want to take that number and move it all the way up to 100%. So at every school that you go to, whether it is in Georgetown or the hinterland, that you've got trained teachers who are there. So that shift in itself from, mid-40s all the way up to high 80s, it shows that the government has taken an approach that cares and looks after and looks out for the Indigenous peoples in that sector.
Do you think that in healthcare, that there should be an integration of modern medicine with Indigenous medicine?
That is a very interesting question because modern medicine was actually birthed out of Indigenous medicine.
Yes. Yes.
So having to take a walk back, and I like that question because it is an argument that I have with a lot of people. People tend to reach for the aspirin and reach for the Tylenol and reach for the Advil, whereby in the jungle we know where to find those things. We may not be able to measure it and give it to you exact because we've lost that knowledge. I think that there should be a happy marriage between the two of them because the forest actually has everything that you need to address all your medical needs. There are so many examples I could point to. I'd probably point to birth control as one of them. Historically, Indigenous peoples, when we would deal with the migration season and rainy season, all that stuff, our women would just take the green heart seed and make a concoction out of it, and they say, you know what, I can't get pregnant now because I estimate we're going to move. They would utilize that, and it would delay their cycle. And that is how the modern birth control was actually born. It is out of Indigenous knowledge. So there should be a happy marriage somewhere in between. You cannot dispel one just for the other.
Do you feel that we should do more in documenting these Indigenous medicine?
Absolutely. I think that there a whole lot needs to be not only in terms of indigenous medicine, but in terms of indigenous history, in terms of our culture, in terms of our languages. I also believe that the government, they've taken a cautionary or a very cautious approach
Mhm.
to inculcating indigenous languages into the school's curriculum.
Mhm.
A very a very cautious approach. Um, I think that a tremendous lot of our culture is contained in our language, or languages, I should say.
Mhm.
So the government should take I'd say, a more proactive role in documenting medicine or education, understanding climate, understanding the forest, all of those things.
Yeah. But I have been advocating that in schools in Guyana and at the university, you should teach Guyanese history first and foremost, rather than West Indian history. What is your view?
You would not find any opposition in me. It is something that I have continuously spoken about. I've touched, knocked on doors within the past administration and this one. When I say past, I'm talking about APNU. I actually had a meeting with Dr. Rupert Rupnarayan at the time, Minister of Education, and told him the very same thing.
Mhm.
We are studying about the Incan civilization, the Mayan civilization, the Aztecs in Guyana when we study indigenous history.
Mhm.
But we're not studying the very same people that would have existed there for well over 13,000 years,
Yes.
who are the indigenous peoples. And in many cases, people say, well, how long have indigenous peoples been in Guyana? Well, over 13,000 years. How long have we, I'd say, demonstrated that we were a civilization? I'd say well over 6,000 years. And that is evidenced by the Barbies monks. We actually, and I say we as in the Arawaks, and they
Mhm.
would have done some of this in the like in the deeper hinterland also, cultivated the Barbies monks during high tides, rainy seasons and stuff. That is how we cultivated. And if they say the ability to cultivate the age of agriculture would be the measure of civilization, we were there 6,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So there's a lot that can be done that still needs to be done.
Yeah, would you advocate for that with the new Minister of Education?
Absolutely, absolutely. It is. I'm a constant voice in their ears about some things that we need to do. It is not something that you just drop on it
Mhm.
and or drop it on their desk and they say, all right, well, this is something I'm going to take. Because now they have to look at how do they build the policy framework for some of these things,
Yeah, because I
right?
think there's a lot of Guyanese
All
home
right,
and diaspora
Professor
who know
Budul,
Guyanese
let's
history. Mhm.
we go one. We just have about 15 minutes more. I want to move on to this
Go
next
ahead.
segment.
Mhm.
Um, Honorable MP, I want to divert your attention a little to the development trust of the government. They are going to continue with expansion of the infrastructure works, drainage, irrigation, roads, highway, even maritime services, and most important, they got to fix the electricity, the instability in the supply of electricity, which is damaging both domestic and commercial appliances, etc. How do you view first the gas ashore electrical project proceeding? How do you view the current state of electrical supply? I know demand has expanded exponentially over the last couple of years, given the housing boom, housing and commercial boom. So, if you can please give us your ideas on the energy part.
Well, I thank you. I think that is something that cannot be overstated. The government is I think that when the People's Progressive Party, Civic, sat there and they looked at the power, I'd say the modernization of Guyana. We want nice things, and those nice things cost money. And people were saying, well, this is going to cost you too much. But they're not looking at the economic benefits of some of these things. The grid being one of them. The grid in Guyana is very old. They've got power vessels that they're renting, but when the supply is there and the grid is old and there's a break in the grid, you'll get blackout. So what the government has done is hired a consulting group to look at how we could modernize the grid. And when I say modernize, strip down all of the old networks and put in new stuff that will be capable of taking off the kind of growth that Guyana has, or that we're going to look at. The gas to energy project in itself, it will transform Guyana's productive sector. Where we historically would have relied on imports to fill, let's take something like furniture, process, cold foods, storage, and all these things. We can now do all of those things domestically. And what I tell people in Guyana is that we do not have enough farmers in Guyana. You could put all of the people to go and farm, but we still will not have enough farmers. We've got the land, but we don't have enough farmers, because when the gas to energy comes on, the demand for our products, all of our agricultural products, all of our fresh fruits, vegetables, fish, all of that stuff, that demand is going to skyrocket. Why? Because we now have access to energy, that we don't leave the pumpkin in the field to spoil, we don't leave the edo, the cassava, all those things in the field to spoil or get rotten or dried out on shipment. We could now peel, clean, IQF them, cold storage them, and ship them anywhere in the world. So it is going to change. It is going to change the face of Guyana.
How early might that be?
I anticipate that it would be late 2026, maybe early 2027.
22. Okay, thank you. All right, I want to pass you on back again to Professor Narayan because I know time is running out. Professor,
Yeah, you have enunciated quite a few things that the PPPC has done for the Amerindian community. What do you think accounts for Azruddin to make, with all of the accomplishment of the PPPC, what accounts for Azruddin inroads into the Amerindian community?
Forgive me, just a bit of allergies. Um, I think one of the things that Azadin would have done is tapped into the sentiment of disproportional access to the economy. So I will go back to that over and over again, because those are what the stats tell us. And those are the people who don't have the access. If you look at it, a tremendous lot of his support in those communities came from those communities where they don't have access. That's one. Um, the second thing is indigenous peoples have always said that we have been left so far behind. And back, before we discovered oil, there was no way to create that access. No way to create that access. And I think those are some of the sentiments that he would have picked up on. And we also know there is evidence, and we've seen pictures and videos of it, where Azadin went into communities and literally bought votes. You show up there, and my community being one of them, my community of St. Cuthberts. When Azadin went into the community, he took a whole wad of cash and gave it to one of our councillors to pay off the people for their votes. We know that. We've got evidence for that. And it didn't only happen in our community, it was replicated in many, many communities, and we know some of them. So tapping into the vote, when you look at how many of those votes were gotten by honest means, I think that if you were to look at it and take some of those numbers off, you'd find a tremendous lot of them would have been APNU supporters. In indigenous communities, once again, the ones that he got who were previous, and it's not a lot, the previous PPP supporters, those are the ones that he expended significant amount of monies to buy.
But isn't that a weakness in the PPP structure, that it is not able to, even though it is making a contribution, it is not able to sustain that contribution?
I don't know if it is a weakness in the PPP structure, because the People's Progressive Party, Civic, as far as I understand it, and for the little that I know, they have never been engaged in vote buying. They've never gone out there with wads of cash and pay people to vote for them. So I think that in itself I don't know if I can say that. The weakness would be once again going back to the historical issues of those communities where we simply did not have access to healthcare, and people have seen this boom in Georgetown, and they have not experienced it yet in the hinterland. But it is a build out. It is not a build out inwards. It's a build out from the core outwards. Because if you start building from the out and going in, then you really have nowhere to go. You're going basically in some cases roads to nowhere. Um, it is taking some time to get to all of the communities, and I think when you go around to the next electoral cycle, the dynamics will be vastly different.
Yeah, I think the Indian communities have a lot to contribute to the major to the major society, and I was wondering, how do you explain what contributions the Amerindian communities bring to the larger community through the political processes?
I I think that one of the things is that, and I've said this previously, is that the indigenous votes are the swing votes. So indigenous peoples pretty much shape the political discourse of Guyana. When you look at, if you look at the elections 2011, 2015, and in one region, for example, the PPP lost that region by one vote. So indigenous peoples, while we may sit there silently and sometimes not show up on the radar, we have a tremendous amount of sway in the political discourse in the country. And I think many times people overlook that, and they just um, look at indigenous peoples with some degree of sympathy instead of looking at indigenous peoples as equals. We may not be equal economically, but we are still equal as Guyanese. And what we deserve is equal access to everything that Guyana has to offer.
Professor Budu.
Yes.
All right. We are nearing. Let's go over to Professor Budu for your last comments. Professor Budu,
Yes.
or any
Uh,
clarification you're seeking from
Well, what I would
Mr.
like to do
Shuman.
in closing, I would say you are an MP. What one reform would you prioritize in Parliament to make development more inclusive and accountable?
I think what the People's Progressive Party Civic has set out is a very bold agenda, not only for indigenous peoples but for all Guyanese. And I think being part of the People's Progressive Party Civic's team is a tremendous honor to be part of that and to contribute to that manifesto and the delivery of that manifesto. Um, I'm very happy to do that. If there is one thing that I would like to put my stamp on, I would go back once again to, and I can't say it enough, to economic integration, finding better ways so that indigenous communities can have access to the economy. There are communities where they would have farmed, 10, 15 acres of cassava or edos or pick any other vegetable, but they don't have any market outlet for it, so the crops just go to waste. Indigenous peoples want to access, they want to contribute, we want to be part of everything that is Guyana. So by putting my stamp on accessibility to those communities would be a massive gain, not only for indigenous communities, but for Guyana also.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Tara. Tara? He's probably not his mic is probably out.
Yeah, he's probably having a little bit of sound difficulties.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that the Amerindian communities have more to contribute, or have a significant contribution, can make a significant contribution to the larger society, not only in terms of the economics, but also like what Dr. Budu mentioned, in terms of the tropical medicine, that many people have gone in there and studied tropical medicines, but they come back to their countries, whether England or the United States, and then they synthesize it and then manufacture it and make huge profits from those. And I don't think that the Guyana government should neglect that part of knowledge, the indigenous knowledge of the Amerindian community. And so when we talk about the integration of the Amerindians, we are not only talking about, like economically, but also in all aspect, in the totality of the culture that they bring forth. They, in the larger society, like you mentioned, tend to frown on the Amerindian community, when in fact the Amerindian community does have the indigenous knowledge that is very crucial in any society.
Yes. And the Armenian Act of 2006 actually lays it out very clear that before anyone can go into any indigenous community to do any kind of research, whether it's historical, cultural, medical, anything, that they actually have to go and comply with a free, prior, and informed consent, go to the communities and get the community's consent. But even before they get there, they have to have permission from the sitting minister of Armenian affairs. So the protection is there in law. And many times, you go to a community and people, I'd say more Westerners tend to go in there under the guise of tourism, and then they'll want to find out about the plant, doing their research in a very clandestine manner, and then they take that now and then they go back and do the very same thing that you said, synthesize it. It is something that we have not found a way to address yet, but I think that is something, once again, it is squarely on the mind, I believe, of the National Two Shows Council to ensure that that is dealt with.
All right. I think that we got to bring the program to a close, but before, I just want the viewers to know that this program is being sponsored by Dave Westian Imports, and the Guyana Dialogue is co-sponsoring it. Is a group based in New York, London, the Caribbean, Toronto in Canada, and in Guyana. Now, Honorable MP, I will now ask you to make your closing remarks.
Well, I want to say a very sincere thank you to you, esteemed, I'd say, intellects, my esteemed elders. If I were to say that much, I'd be honored to call you that and to say it's been a tremendous honor to be on this show with you. I look forward to what Guyana is going to be, and I think that every single Guyanese, whether they're domestically domiciled or abroad, should look at Guyana not for what Guyana is right now, but for what Guyana will be in the next 5 and 10 years and going down the road. It is a transformation that I think people simply cannot get their hands on. The government is leapfrogging development. They're not taking this gradual approach to development. They're leapfrogging development. They're leapfrogging initiatives that I think that, 5, 6 years, 10 years down the road, we are going to see that. I want to say a very sincere thank you to your viewers, and a very sincere thank you to you, Dr. Tara, for inviting me to be part of this show. I'm very honored to be here.
No, well, we thank you, and we hope to get you back because you have a repertoire of knowledge, and you are not only a leader of the Amerindian community, you're also a national leader. So you have much to contribute as well to the country's development. And I want to thank our panelists here, Professor Narain Prasad, who's a social psychologist by profession, and Professor Muniram Budu, who is civil and structural engineer by profession. And our technician behind is Asif Ali, Our regular host is unavailable tonight. I'm Shamiz Ali, and we wouldn't be here for the 25th. No, the Christmas. Yes, on the 25th and the 4th of January, because those are two major holidays. But we're back on the 8th of January with our next program, and next week we'll be having the Consul General of New York on our program, Ambassador Brotherson, and he will talk about the fine work that the embassy, the consulate is doing here in New York to keep the diasporans abreast of developments of Guyana. So once again, we thank you, um, Mr. Shuman. Carry on with the wonderful works. You're doing a great job in Guyana. And our panelists here, and once again, I want to thank you, Professor Budu, Professor Narayan, and for the public to know, this is all voluntary service. Nobody here is being paid. I know people have been asking this question, but nobody here get paid. This is strictly voluntary service from these esteemed gentlemen. So thank you very much again, Honorable Schumann, and wish you all the best and a successful tour in Parliament. And I know you will shine. You're definitely a rising star in our country. Thank you
Thank you.
and God bless.
Thank you
Uh,
so much. I was hoping that we would have touched on the substantive matter of Parliament and what's going on there, but I
Yeah,
think we'll
well,
save that for the next show.
yeah. We'll get you
Thank
on
you.
back. Don't worry. We'll get you back. We'll get you back early by February.
Thank you.